All right, welcome to another Docker YouTube Live Ask Me Anything question and answer format. So, if this is your first time here, basically we're going to go through, I say we, but I mean me. I'm going to go through the YouTube chat and we'll answer questions in the order that they were given, hopefully. Sometimes YouTube likes to change that, depending on whether I have it to set to live chat or top chat or whatever. So I'll go through the questions. They don't have to be Docker or even DevOps specific. But obviously, the crazier the question gets, the more unlikely I'll have an answer. So just to recap where we're at here, this is like the third or fourth week of the Q&A. I am sort of still new at this, so we might have technical hiccups. We might have the connection disconnect because Wi-Fi sucks for a second. So just so you know, this is an hour long. We may usually run a little long, so it usually runs past the hour. Of course, we're starting a few minutes late like usual on the internet. So if you see a disconnect in the middle, just realize that it's probably going to come right back in a second. It's just usually a hiccup on my Wi-Fi or just general internet connection. If you're new to my courses or the things that I talk about, you can check out a lot of my work at brettfisher.com. That's BRETFISHER.com. Links in the description. I have several courses on Docker and Docker Swarm for sale. Those are all links that we'll get through later. Basically, there's a whole page I keep all of my Docker stuff in that we'll talk about, I'm sure, throughout the hour. So let's jump to the questions. Feel free to just say hi if you're just here to watch. This recording is not usually going live. I don't normally post these because we're here every week. Every Thursday, I'm here talking to you. So I figure if you miss it, just come back to the next week, and that way you won't get out-of-date answers or anything wrong. And if there's anything that I don't know the answers to, then feel free to reach out later on Twitter or Facebook, anywhere really on the YouTube of this actual video. You can actually ask those questions, and I will post them after if you stay past this hour, and I will catch up with any question that didn't answer and maybe give you quick references in the YouTube chat. So if I didn't get to your question and you're feeling bummed because we ran out of time, don't worry, I will answer all of them in chat afterwards, just not live on video because, we all need a break from streaming live on the internet, right? So let's start out. Baptiste, ahoy. How are you doing? Rob. Okay, I'm waiting on your question, Rob, so get back to me when you have it. Jeremiah, how do you recommend setting up cron jobs in a swarm environment? So we're getting right to it. That's great. That's great. Good questions right off the bat. We'll get to that in a second. I just want to go through the next couple of these. Rohan, is this live? Well, yes, it is live because I'm reading your tweet minutes after you said it. So that's definitely pretty live. As about as live as it gets it. There probably is like a 10-second or so delay between what you post and what I see and what I record and what you see. But yeah, it's live. Stephen, cron job question is good. I've seen you're running a course in London about Docker. If I have completed Docker Mastery and plan to start Docker Swarm Mastery, would I benefit from the course content? So, great question as well. I'm going to do them in order, and then it looks like Rob just posted. So these questions are going to all stack up, which is fun. And I'm going to start off. So first, we need to go to the browser command line. So I have to switch screens real quick. So wait while I transform. no sound. Okay. Wow. We had no sound for like 10 minutes. All right. See, didn't I tell you I was new at this? I don't know how that happened. Seems like my mic got switched off in the software. So sorry about that. I don't have a recording of that, so yeah, that sucks. All right, so a quick recap of what we just did. I'm going to back up. I'm not going to talk very long about this stuff because really the answers to these things are all in the links I'll provide you. So the cron question is a good one. Let's see, where did we leave off? Yeah, that sucks. Sorry, guys. All right. I'm going to back up a second and recap what I just basically said to answer just 3 of the questions. The cron stuff. Basically, I have answers here for cron. Watch my DockerCon Part 2 talk on brettfisher.com/docker, and that will show you the sort of samples I use. This most basic one here you have is not this one. This one. We don't want this one. So go into this dog versus cats, and my point is that Swarm can do basic cron stuff out of the box, right? You don't need cron necessarily because cron only knows about one server, doesn't know about a cluster, doesn't know about a swarm. So cron itself is not multi-host aware. And so whenever you're dealing with an orchestrator, you have to think in terms of, do I want this to run on all nodes? Or do I want it to run many times or one time? You know, those sorts of things that cron can't necessarily handle. So the ways you get around that, and I have several examples. So in this repo, github.com/brettfisher/dog versus cat, I talk about this in my DockerCon talk, and in there is stack. These are stack files for Swarm. And we have, which one am I looking for? Prune. So this example, which you saw me show a while ago and talk about forever, and yeah, is a very simple example of how to just do a simple shell loop to run a Docker command every day. And in this case, it's pruning the images every day, once a day on every node. And so I'm just using deploy mode global, which is ensuring that every node gets this. It acts like a service. It's not a security concern because it's not in terms of the Docker socket because it's not opening up. There's no network traffic. It's not opening up ports. This is simply a local connection for the Docker command line talking to the local Docker engine. So it's all nice and easy, and that just works. The other example is, what if you need to run something but only run it once on each node? And in that case, I was showing this RexRay example that installs a Docker plugin. No, this one is RexRay, so it installs a Docker plugin once on each system, and it uses a Docker tool or a tool created by one of the Docker engineers called Swarm Exec, which is designed for you to run a global mode service that will then go to every node and then every future node you ever add to the Swarm because it's global mode, and it will run that command once. And in this case, it's just installing a Docker plugin. That way I have the storage driver I need in order for Swarm to work. And if you want anything fancier, go check out openfaz/faz. So that's on GitHub. OpenFaz is a functions as a service run by Alex, a friend of mine. He also has this great tool called jobs as a service. So that's github.com/AlexEllis/jazz. And I will put some of the links of these in the ends at the end of the chat. In fact, I'll just put these in there now while we're here. Let's see. Way too soft on the volume? Really? Let me know in chat if I'm still way too soft, because the mic volume seems appropriate, at least in my software. So we have that, and then we have repo. And then OpenFaz for functions as a service. And then jobs as a service, which So I'll put all these links in there. So, all right. So the next question was about me talking workshops. So I do live workshops around the world all year long. You can actually see that at brett.com/findme. Whenever I'm talking in public or to a large group, I put it on this URL. So you can come find me because there's really no other good place to keep that schedule. So sometimes I actually look at it to make sure I know where I'm supposed to be. So right now I'm on break. But I'm going to be in New York City and London for O'Reilly Velocity over the next 2 months. And I'm doing each one of them is a 2-day workshop. It starts at Docker 101 and goes all the way through Docker 101. And then the second day is all Swarm mode. So the question was really, if I've done Swarm Mastery or if I've done Docker Mastery, but not yet Swarm Mastery, do I need this 2-day workshop? If you have completed Docker Mastery, about 50% of that 2-day workshop, a little bit in the first day and a little bit in the second day, will be redundant. Or it'll be stuff that was already in the course if you watched and did every lecture. But about 50% of it we cover in the live workshop that I just can't fit into an 8 or 9 hour course. It would have to be like a 20-hour course. Because of the way the learning on the internet works, you have to, things take longer and the videos are longer in order to get the same concepts through versus if we're all in the same room together and we're going all together, typing commands together, doing live stuff. So the live workshops go way faster. So we get through much more of the troubleshooting tools, the distributed problems of Swarm. We talk a lot more about third-party tools like Elasticsearch for logging and Prometheus monitoring, and we go into distributed troubleshooting, and we actually set up advanced security stuff on the engine and mess with the engine config. None of that stuff's in my 2 courses yet. So I would say yes. If you had completed both of my courses totally, I would say you're still going to get about 25% more stuff in the workshop. But even if you don't go to the workshops, if you're ever at a conference, stop by, say hi to me, give me a high five. We'll take a selfie and put it on the internet. I love talking to people in the community, which is kind of, as a Docker captain, that's kind of like why we exist, right, is to talk to people. So I take that job very seriously. All right, hopefully that's caught us up. So sorry about that horrible audio issue, and now I know to check my mics on OBS before I go live. And so thanks for being patient. All right, how do I handle... Docker suitable for databases. Docker suitable for databases, yes, absolutely. I think the conversations around do we do databases in workshop the conversations around databases were largely a 3 and 2 year ago conversation, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Once we got Docker volumes, once we got clustered storage, RexRay is a great tool for Docker Swarm. There's other tools out there. I was showing off the drivers. Once you get driver plugins for volumes, which you can find at the Docker store, this sort of becomes a solved problem. It makes sure that the storage is where it needs to be for the container that needs to run. That was one of the biggest issues we had with databases. But yes, absolutely, everyone I know that does databases that have to run them and they are already doing containers, they go ahead and run them in containers. If you are on a cloud provider, I would advise you to use the cloud provider's database solution first. It's always easier that way. They're always better than us at running databases. There's very few people on the planet that run databases better than AWS and more resilient and with higher uptime and more, all that stuff. So I usually recommend to people to just do what the cloud provides, and then if not, then yes, sure, you can run your own, and Docker does it just fine. All right, so how do I handle dependencies across? Hello, Alex, and thanks everybody for letting me know about no sound. So sorry. I don't see new messages in the chat when I'm reading questions, and there's no. And I turn off desktop notifications so they're not popping up on our screen. So sorry about that. I'll just make sure I do better next time. How do I handle dependencies across containers between databases and web containers like Django and a web container with libs requiring MySQL modules, which is running on a different container? Alex, you do that through your Docker file. If you have a MySQL container, if you have a dependency inside your web container for Django, you put that in the Docker file for that container. That doesn't mean you're running the MySQL engine in that container, but that does mean you'll just add to the Docker file like for example, the MySQL client libraries. You would add those through whatever package manager you normally would, maybe apt-get or whatever. So depending on which OS and container solution you're going to use. So yeah, Docker files. And you definitely don't, there's no inner dependencies like that, right? The way that the containers talk is over the network. So they're obviously not going to be able to share dependency files or anything like that. So, but good question. Igor, you're funny. You guys are great. Yes, read my lips. Audio wasn't working. Blah, blah, blah. My face was definitely red. All right. Almost through all these comments. And any of those things you wanted me to continue explaining further, please put them in there and just say, hey, I have another question about storage or cron or whatever. No, I don't believe there's anyone. I don't think there's any Docker people in my neighborhood. I think I'm it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it lets me have two live windows, but you know what? I'll look into that. Maybe on the live. I'm looking at the live YouTube stream page, and I have to scroll through old questions, and then it stays there at the old question. So yeah. All right. Rob's got a question. Okay. Been trying to curl container catalog from a GitLab registry, but haven't been able to. Apologies if it's really a GitLab question. The container catalog, is that in the GitLab registry? From a GitLab registry? Yeah, I don't know GitLab registry. Yeah, never used it. So I know that they have one, and I know that it's probably based on Docker's open source registry, but I don't know. I mean, usually when querying registries, and I don't know what you mean by querying. You mean like, oh, you're curling. Yeah, so I don't know why curl wouldn't work. So yeah, that's weird. Sorry, I don't have the answer to that question. All right. Well, I think I'm actually all cut up, and like everyone who was like, "Oh, well, he's talked forever," and I'm going to leave. All those people left. So feel free to ask more questions. And what I'm going to do is see if I can't make sure that this. Can I add another chat window? I don't see where it lets me do that. Yeah, it doesn't let me do that. This is the Rode Podcaster mic. And I had to get it because I live in an area with jets. We have a Navy base nearby, and so jets are constantly flying overhead. So a Blue Yeti, which you see a lot, the Blue Yeti, I had that, and it picked up every background noise imaginable. So this mic is a dynamic mic, so it only really picks up right here. So yeah, it was kind of expensive, but it sounds a lot better, I think, too. Yeah. All right, so while you're all here, I will talk about some of the other things that I didn't get to cover. So in this topic, so by the way, on my Docker page on brettfisher.com/Docker, obviously lots of links there, links to my coupons on my courses, blah, blah, blah. But on there is a link to my AMA. So I have sort of a GitHub style Ask Me Anything. Lots of questions and answers in there. I bet you 50% of the questions asked in this live chat are probably answered there, but not near as interesting because you don't get to hear me chat about it forever. So feel free, if you think of questions later, you can always ask them in that AMA. And I tend to only answer questions in the YouTube Live for people asking it in YouTube Live, and then I answer the questions on the AMA in GitHub on there. And sometimes it takes me days to get back to you, but eventually I will get back to everyone. Mostly that's just Docker stuff, but there is some career stuff, DevOps stuff, how to be a good sysadmin, stuff like that in there. But for the topic for today, if we have anybody that does Node or PHP, we can talk about Node or PHP anytime, but I have 2 repos for those kinds of projects, for sample projects to get you off the ground as a baseline for the best way to use Docker in those frameworks and programming languages. So the PHP one is still a really bad, rough work in progress. I need to put some more stuff into it. It was really it came out of a project with a client, and I sort of dumbed it all down and made it super generic, and then just kind of posted it and didn't go back and actually comment everything really well. But the code's still there, so there's a lot of details in there about it. It's just not necessarily well documented yet, and it doesn't build out of the box because you have to do a few things to make it build properly. But on the Node.js one, it just works out of the box. It's using a very basic Express app, and it's designed for optimizing your local development workflow as well as being able to run it on Swarm in your CI/CD or in production. So if you didn't know about those, check them out. And those are well supported by the community, especially the Node one. I get a lot of comments and feedback on that. So, and spoiler, I've got a course I'm working on for Docker on Node.js that'll be all about this project and how to do all things Node in Docker and Docker Swarm. So that's coming later this year. All right. You're welcome, Eric, and thanks for sticking around. That must have been horrible to watch. Bala, how to make use of an LVM inside a container. For example, I would like to mount an LVM inside a container and run MySQL. So that's an interesting question, Bala. I'm not sure, one, why you'd want to do that. So the answer, usually you don't want this. So the idea of a container, one of the ideas or the things you do in it is you limit what the things in the container can do, right? And in order for something in the container to start mounting volumes, mounting partitions, or having access to LVM, pretty much means their root on the host, right? So my answer, and you usually don't want that. That's usually a pretty bad idea. So I think what you let me answer a different question, and you can go ahead and feel free to comment on this, Bala, if you have more details on it. But if you are wanting to run MySQL and have a bunch of LVM mounts for volumes and disks, you do that with the Docker run or the Swarm service create commands. You go in there and you actually create volume connections. I recommend always using volumes, the plugin, not necessarily bind mounts. That we talk about that in my Docker Mastery course, because really in production, bind mounts, it's harder to manage them, and they're not guaranteed to be on every node, and there's extra work you have to do on each node to make sure that those are set up correctly. So I always recommend using the volumes command, but you don't need LVM inside the container to do that. The idea is that Docker is controlling storage and that the container just sees a path. It has just paths. It doesn't need any special permissions to mount disk or make partitions or even do NTFS connections, right? Not NTFS, sorry, NFS connections. I guess you could do a SMB NTFS on Windows. But the idea there is that you want the container to only have access to the things that you've given it with the Docker commands. But if you give it the ability to go and access a bunch of stuff on the network, or you give it the NFS password, for example, into the container so it can connect over the network, now you've added risk and security concern to that program because anything running in that container has access to that information versus running it in your Docker and Swarm commands, which is outside the container and follows that whole rule of least privilege. So if you have a different type of question than that, please feel free to re-ask it. But that's a good question, and it's a good example of how to set up volumes and storage, right? So Alex, what's up with the Docker Composer naming of services? Like if I have a DB service, the container created is named as project folder underscore DB1 instead of just DB. So yeah, I think you're talking about Docker Compose, the command line tool, because that is what names those containers. And the answer to that, Alex, is you need Docker Compose does a lot of stuff in the background to make it easy for you to have multiple containers or replicas in a service. But Docker Compose isn't using Swarm, so it can't create a Swarm service. So the reason it's first off, the project folder. Let's just talk about that for a second. Every Docker Compose command you run is based on the project. That's its scope. That's how Docker Compose knows what to go shut down if you do a Docker Compose down. Is it uses the names of the containers, the networks, and all the other things you create with it. It names them all so that it can go find them later in Docker. Mostly because we didn't have labels years earlier. We didn't have labels when Docker Compose was created. So it was using container naming as a way to identify what things it's running. And did you know with Docker Compose, you can run the same app multiple times in different container stacks by just changing the project name. You can hard code that name. If we go to the command line, the container project name for Compose, let's go here, is always the directory name by default. But let me look for Compose sample 2. Let me just look in here. So I have this Docker Compose file, right? If I do a Docker Compose up, it automatically creates everything with the name of the directory. So it'd be like Docker sample 2. But if you just do a Docker Compose help, you will see information about the project name. And so you can give an alternate name for the project with each command, and then that way you could technically, and the default project name is a directory, you can overwrite it. So you could have two different sets of Docker Compose commands and two different windows, or however you want to do it, and they're running from the same directory and running different copies of your image with different databases and different containers. It was kind of cool. If you want to compare things in an interface between, that's what you can do with Docker Compose. It's pretty slick. So also, the reason there's a 1 on the end is if you add a second replica inside your Compose file, Docker Compose has to spin up a second container, and container names have to be different. So it needs that 1 there in case you spin up more replicas, it'll do a 2, 3, 4. So hopefully that makes sense. Great question. Yeah. What are the best practices for adding? This is Justin. Oh, thanks, Theo, for helping out. Justin, what are the best practices for adding SSH keys to a container on build to be able to put dependencies from private Git repos only meant for local development work? All right, so SSH keys are a constant source of frustration. We have hopefully coming, it's currently an experimental, a whole new build kit tool that's going to replace the current way you build in Docker today. That is an experimental on the current 1806 release. If you just go and look up build kit on the internet, you will probably find it. Oop, not build kite. Build kit. And it is a brand new way to build, and it's super wicked fast. It's really slick, and it's going to give us the ability to take Docker image building to the next level in the next few years. But right now it's still an experimental, so it's not the default. The reason I'm bringing that up is because that will eventually be the solution where we'll be able to do bind mounts into containers during build time, which we cannot do today. Then bind mount in your SSH keys, then build, and then that bind mount was never technically in the image, so it's never stored in your image. That's what you really want, right? Since we don't have that today, you can do it with experimental and some other settings. But if you don't want to do that and you have experimental today, the other stuff that you can do is the thing that I have done. And I'm going to see if I can't find it inside of this PHP project, because we did this on a PHP project where inside the compose file, at the very top, you can add template information that is then used in every service that you want it to be. So it's kind of like an alias to something so that you don't have to repeat. And in that template area, you can have an SSH key that's in here or you put it in an override file. And the override file, so dockercompose.override.yaml, that override file is never stored in your repo. In fact, you put it in your git ignore so that you never have it. And then the local user takes a copy of the SSH key they need. It's going to have to be unencrypted. So it probably should be a read-only key because technically you're pulling it out of your .ssh directory and all that security stuff. But if you're willing to do that, you can put it in that compose file at the top, and then if you look up compose file in the Docker documentation and you go all the way to the bottom, there's this new thing, relatively new, called extension fields. And it's a YAML feature that it now works in Compose that allows you to do templating at the very top of your Compose file, and basically it keeps you dry. Don't repeat yourself, so that you can add anything you want there, including an entire SSH key or in the override, and then you can reference that as a bind mount in each one when you're running. When you're building, however, you still don't get that. So for local building, there's a long-running, this is a complicated question, right? Lots of ways you can solve this problem. There is a Docker, if you've probably seen this, Docker SSH build. This is a GitHub, this is in the issues. In fact, I think I have it in my bugs, maybe, my bug list. Yeah. So this is a long-standing issue that lots of people have had various workarounds and ways to do it. So I'm going to post this in chat. If any of the things that I said just a while ago you don't think are for you, specifically because you have to build and you maybe don't want your key permanently in the image. Obviously, you don't want to ever send that key in an image up to anything else on the internet. Check through that really long-running post. There is 4 years worth of comments in here. And I think if you go all the way to the bottom, we've got activity lately because multi-staging, which is a cool thing that came out last year, you should look into that. Multi-staging plus the new build kit stuff, as they referenced, again, 17 days ago here, they're referencing, we're now finally getting the end solution for that problem. And I think most people that use things like package managers, NPM package managers, PHP package managers, Go package managers for private repos, they're going to have this issue. So if you're in a team and you have a fairly complex project, you're going to end up with this kind of issue. It's a problem you're going to have to solve. And each team I've seen solve it a little differently because we don't really have the end solution for this, and eventually we will. Great question. Complicated answer. Sorry that one took so long. Rob is back. Do I need to secure the Docker daemon socket to run auto deployment from GitLab CI? I see this in a guide, but don't know what it means. Rob, so starting out, unless you have some custom plugins or something that need to talk to the Docker socket, I recommend usually that people are already creating YAMLs that have a bunch of commands to do in sort of a script-like fashion. Just have it SSH to the server and provide SSH keys to your GitLab for now. That works. Whether it's Swarm, Docker Run, Kubernetes, like those all work, right? Once you need to talk to the Docker socket over a TCP, you then need to manually add certificates to each server that you want to talk to from GitLab or Jenkins or anything. And so you need to lock that down. And that Docker doesn't do that out of the box. It doesn't automatically create certificates for the TCP connection. There is no login for the Docker engine. Docker engine does not take a username and password really out of the box. There are ways around that, but out of the box it doesn't provide that. So you have to use the TLS certificate to protect it from eavesdropping as well as authentication. And so you can look up in the Docker, if you just have Docker secure, I think it's called Docker engine. I think Docker secure the engine. I think. And then I'm going to find, usually I hit it on the first go. Protecting the Docker daemon socket. So I will put this in the chat. This is a walkthrough of how to manually create a self-signed certificate and assign it to the Docker engine configuration. And then you would take that certificate, that the private, you would give it to your GitLab so that it could then connect securely to the daemon socket over TCP. Hopefully that makes sense. All it's doing is using HTTP HTTPS rather with TLS, but you have to deal with a certificate. So you could go buy a certificate, but in this case, it's really just your CI solution needing to talk to the server, so it doesn't usually need that a level of stuff. You can just self-sign one and then pass it around if you need to. There are ways to go around it. There's a tool called SOCAT, S-O-C-A-T. There's other things you can look at. If you buy Docker EE, this is provided out of the box. So there's various ways to solve that problem if you want to buy something or add another tool in. Great question, though. Gina, deployed application using Compose on one server with blue-green ports. My Nginx is on another server with upstream. I am proxy passing to achieve zero downtime. Proxy passing to achieve zero downtime. Is that a good practice? All right, so when you say you're using, Gina, I have questions. If you're using Compose, do you mean you're using Docker Compose the command line on the server? Because that is not something I recommend. But if you're using Swarm, if you're using the latest version of Swarm and you're just doing rolling updates of a service, you have 0 updates built in. In fact, that's a brand new section just posted last month on my Docker Swarm Mastery course on all the details of how to do 0 connection loss, rolling updates in Swarm. And there's more to it than you think. In your case, you're saying using Compose on one server. So I'm assuming you're talking about the Docker Compose command line on one server with blue-green ports. So I guess you're launching one on one port, launching another one on a different port, and manually doing that. And then my Nginx is on another server with upstream. I am proxy passing to achieve zero downtime. Is that a good practice? Generally, I mean, if it works for you, great. But generally, that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of doing things in the right order and hand-holding just to get zero downtime. If you only have a single server, do a single node swarm. It will solve all this out of the box without all of that sort of laborious hand-holding. And you may not even need a proxy if it's just a single container that you need to put on HTTP or whatever. I talk about that in my Docker video at DockerCon. So on my brettfisher.com page, there's this talk. I talk a little bit about that, and I show off some health checks, which you need, and some other things you need. If you maybe need a front-end proxy, you can use Traffic. I use that in that example, as well as in the example repo for that talk. And that, I think, is a much more scalable, automated solution rather than depending on you making sure that you do all the right things in the right order to make sure that it doesn't go down. So and the way that I do it is rolling updates, not blue-green or canary. Those are things you can do with the proxy in front, but I don't go into those yet in that talk. So if you have to do blue-green instead of rolling update, you're going to need to do it with a proxy on the front end. But you can still do that in Swarm. It's just that the Swarm update command isn't going to do that for you. It's going to be that combined with you doing stuff manually in a proxy of some sort. All right. All right. It's not that your solution doesn't work. It's just there might be a better way. So, all right. So Alex has a question. More of an architecture than Docker-specific question. How would you support multiple devs working on different branches between the same domain to run tests simultaneously, maybe different ports per branch? So support multiple devs between the same domain to run tests simultaneously. Well, so I'm not really sure. Maybe some more information will help, Alex. Are you asking, like maybe you have a centralized server that everybody deploys servers to for testing? Are you asking about that? Because I mean, if you've got different developers on different branches on their own machines, whatever they're doing locally isn't going to affect anyone else, right? So I'm not really sure if you're asking about a single server that they're all using for CI or maybe something else. While you come back at me with more information, I will say something we did cool last year with PHP, PHP project, was they had basically they have epics, right? So this was a large team, 30 to 40 people, developers. They have epics, And for each epic, their Jenkins CI solution would automatically build a new AWS cluster of servers. This is pre-Swarm, running Docker with complete automation, right? So we'd use CloudFormation templates and other tools to completely create a whole new set of infrastructure just for that epic. And then it would automatically give it a Route 53 DNS name, and so the developer would know based on some naming standards how, basically I create a new epic branch, I wait 10 minutes, and then my stuff's all going to be ready inside of a testing infrastructure. The problem with that was that for every epic, there's a bunch of servers that are sitting around idle, and so it was very expensive to do. Right, it was very automated, but also could be more efficient. So what we did with Swarm was we created a concept forum where you have one swarm, and you create a compose file that is the entire stack of stuff that everyone needs, right? And you put a proxy layer in front of that, like traffic, which it works with Docker Swarm. And that is also demoed in my dogs versus cats demo that's on that link to DockerCon 2018. And so I use traffic to make different DNS names go to different stacks, essentially, Swarm stacks, that have different services based on DNS host names. So what we did is we created a template compose file that for every epic, their CI solution would simply deploy a new stack using the same compose file over and over, and based on the stack name, it would change the DNS names that traffic was looking for. So then traffic, instead of AWS CloudFormation and AWS ELB stuff, we're doing it all inside the same set of nodes. And as they add more epics, we're just adding more stacks to the same swarm. And then at another layer inside the swarm, we had it set up for auto-scaling. So anytime the server memory usage or CPU got too high, Amazon would automatically add more nodes to the swarm, right? So there's 2 layers to that, but that allowed us to say, basically give them an idea of they could save a lot of money on not having all this extra infrastructure. And then it was very easy for them to spin up and spin down new stacks. Instead of it taking 10 or 15 minutes, it took them, a minute maybe, depending on how big the images were they had to download. So that's really cool. So Alex, if that helps you, you might consider Swarm for that. If you were thinking that you want to have DNS names based for your different devs, and you got to set up the automation on that. But even if you didn't have automation, if you just had one person's job for someone to say, "Hey, I need a new stack based on these repos," then you could have that compose file and have it auto create, and you could decide. You have your CI solution set up to maybe on every new branch automatically start making images and putting those in an image registry, or inside that compose file, maybe you don't want all that extra stuff, so you decide inside that compose file that when these new branches are made, that the compose file will download the images inside the CI, manually create them, and then upload them to a registry. Because remember, Swarm needs a registry. Swarm, you can't build custom images on each node of the Swarm and have it really work well. You need to have those images. So for each one of those branches, you can either have like an automated solution like Docker Hub build those images for every branch, or branches that start with a certain name. You can actually go into Docker Hub and say branches that start with or end with these certain names automatically build. Or you can manually do that with the compose file each time. I prefer the automated way, but hopefully that helps. If not, Alex, ask more questions. Okay. That's a really slick solution, by the way. I love the idea of having a swarm that I basically just keep loading more and more stacks of the same software over and over again. And it just uses DNS name routing with traffic to use different versions. Imagine you had a product and you had to support 10 different versions, and so you could just have all 10 versions running in the same swarm with different DNS names. So pretty cool. Bala asked, I am sure many people would have asked this. Sorry to ask. I don't have any certificates. I am planning to take DCA. I am going through Docker Mastery course. Please suggest what all materials to look. Okay, in Docker Mastery, at the very end is a lecture about DCA. And so scroll into the course. It's in the very bottom section, the bonus section. It's, I think, the last lecture of the entire course, and it basically it sends you to a link, an article on my website. Um, or you could just Google Docker DCA Brett Fisher, and you'll get a link on my website, and I'll just put that in chat. So this will tell you all about the DCA. I was one of the first beta testers to pass it. Didn't quite ace it, but I got close. So you can read that. It'll tell you about the courses that I have. Probably get you 50 to 60% of the way there. But remember that the DCA is about Docker Enterprise Edition, and I don't teach Enterprise Edition. I teach the open source community edition stuff. So in order to take the DCA, you will need to get a trial of Docker Enterprise Edition and run it and learn all about it, learn all the features of it. And that's why I say my course gets you, but Docker EE is basically just a GUI and an advanced functionality sitting on top of all of the Docker toolsets. So you need to have the background of Docker Mastery's course before you can learn Docker EE, really. So I would say, yes, take Docker Mastery, then get the study guides, like in my my blog article here. The study guides linked to from there. And then basically what I did to prep was I had Docker running on my machine. I set up Docker EE in the cloud as a temp trial license for like a week or two. And I went through those study guides, and if I couldn't answer the question, because basically the study guides tell you exactly which things you need to know how to do. If I couldn't do that from memory, I kept doing it until I could do it from memory. And I did every one of those. And so once I could pass all those questions without having to go, because during the test you can't look anything up. You can't go to the command line help. You can't go to the internet. It's basically a multi-choice question, and you have to know the answer. And they watch you through your webcam, so they know if you're cheating. They know if you're not even allowed to have like pencils and paper in the room. They actually make you turn your laptop around. I've had friends that have desktop cameras that they can't move, and they had to like pick up their iMac and like move it around the room. Or you can go to DockerCon and you can take the test at DockerCon in a proctored solution. Looks like we lost the connection for a second. And that sucks. Yeah, that was it. But I think we're back. Okay, so it's 12:05. I totally screwed up the first 15 minutes with no audio, so I'll hang around for a little bit longer. If you're still around, you have more questions, feel free to ask, and I will get to them. And if you jump back in later and you want to ask more questions, you can always ask them in the live chat, and I'll get to them. But I tend to start ignoring the live chat within like 30 minutes after we quit. So I think we're all caught up on questions. But the DCA is a good solid test. So, but just realize that it's on Docker's paid products. So, but that implies that you know the free ones. Yeah, so back to the Alex question from earlier, that would be interesting to create a sample Swarm solution with some CI built in to see how you deploy stacks, but I don't know when I'd have time to make that. So inside this PHP project, we were using this sample PHP file here, and just basically they were using lots of microservices. So we were taking each service and just repeating it over and over again. And then we took that file, changed a few things, and then we could easily deploy it over and over again to Swarm. And as long as for each one of these, which you don't see them in here, but you would see what it looks like to use traffic for an app if we go to my dogs versus cats. So if, for example, you went and looked at my voting app. So the voting app in here, since it's using a traffic load balancer on the front end, each one of these that needs to be a public endpoint has these traffic labels, and those labels are what tell traffic for each of your swarm services how to automatically route traffic. And the cool thing about traffic is that this all integrates with Let's Encrypt. So in one go, you can have it automatically go to Let's Encrypt, get your SSL, bring it down for each service that you need to deploy, connect it to that service, and then automatically route the DNS name. So what I did for this example is because in dogs versus .cat, I needed every subdomain to all go to the same swarm. I just went into the internet DNS and I put a wildcard that said anything at dog versus cat, just send it to my swarm, right? And then I could just I could spin up new DNS names and new services all the time just by using these 3 traffic commands, labels rather, and it would automatically route those all to my swarm. So in this way, I could spin up infinite versions of my dog versus cat demo in the same swarm, all using the same domain name, and they would all just start suddenly working on it. They would all start suddenly working, right? I wouldn't need to open up new ports on the internet. I wouldn't need to make new DNS names manually or go get certificates. It all just kind of works with traffic out of the box. So, recommended CI/CD solutions. Well, there's only 1,000 of them, so pick one that supports Docker. Really, though, I think maybe my top 3. I am not a fan of Jenkins, but everybody uses Jenkins. It's like it's the number one CI solution. So there's Jenkins. It's not my favorite, but because it is just more complex and it's big and can be slow. So there's Jenkins, and then there's now they now own CloudBees, the company, right, who owns Jenkins. That's the Jenkins company. They now own CodeShip. So CodeShip is my favorite cloud-hosted CI solution that is cloud vendor agnostic. So I've used them for 6 years now, and one of their lead engineers is a friend of mine. Hi, Laura. So they're now owned by CloudBees as well. But that doesn't change anything. That just really gives them a deeper bench of people to support the product. And then if you're looking pure open source and sort of pure modern stuff, there's Drone. Oof, that's kind of big. So Drone is a popular one. You can run that in a container. It's kind of designed with Docker in mind. It actually is built on the same programming language as Docker is Go. So that's sort of the purest open source full-featured solution. Jenkins is obviously the enterprise full-featured solution that probably has the most resources and tools and things out there. And then CodeShip would be the first one I'd go with on cloud stuff. There's obviously stuff like Travis CI works fine. There's lots of other ones out there, but those are my top 3. Rob is back with sample CI solution. This hobby cube project has a good approach, but it's intended for K8s. Also, the Terraform scripts aren't reliable. Was thinking an Ansible solution would be better. I'm not sure if there's a question there. Terraform, to me, Terraform and Ansible are kind of 2 different things. I use them together. In fact, Docker uses them together. I look at, Terraform is great at creating cloud infrastructure in a repeatable fashion, and then over time you can make changes with that way, right? Cloud agnostic wise, like instead of using CloudFormation. And then Ansible, I would say, is better at doing stuff on a group of servers that exist at the same time. And I know that probably Ansible can create all the things in the cloud. I don't use Ansible that way. Not that it's wrong to do that. I don't. I also like SaltStack, but I'm a big fan of SaltStack because I think it is a little more forward-thinking in ops for cloud stuff than Ansible once was. Ops, to me, Ansible kind of came from a developer background, and SaltStack came from more of an ops-centric background, but that's just my impression. So I'm not sure why you're saying they're reliable or whatever, or that Ansible necessarily would be better. I don't really have any opinion on that. I've not known Terraform to be unreliable, but then again, I'm not sure what you're trying to use. If it's really, really complicated, obviously your mileage may vary. I don't know anything about your solution, so I'm not sure I have anything else to add to that. I heard Jenkins is hard. Jenkins I wouldn't say is hard. It's got lots of bells and whistles, and you may not need all that. So I tend to not go for the end all be all top of the line complete solution if I don't need all that, right? And that's exactly what Jenkins is. Like it has all the advanced enterprisey features, and a lot of small teams just don't need all that. So they can get by with CodeShip or Drone, something like that. And Circle CI. Yeah, there's Circle CI. There's GitLab. GitLab just keeps adding more and more features. So that's another popular one I see. I'm not. It's not that I'm not a fan of GitLab. I just don't have a lot of experience with GitLab across all of its feature sets. So I don't feel comfortable recommending it. But I just know lots and lots of people do, and they depend on it every day. So, yes, absolutely, Rob. You're correct. There is a container for Jenkins. All of these have a container-based solution if they're an open source tool. So yes, in fact, setting up Jenkins is now easier than ever, right? It hides a lot of the complexity of the Java stuff away. But it starts to get more complicated. Of course, all these get more complicated, but Jenkins gets more complicated when you want to try to use a fleet of servers and have it assigning work to wherever it needs to be in a swarm. That may or may not be the easiest thing to use in terms of using Jenkins over something else. I tend to not do my own CI. I tend to prefer a hosted solution just because CI, like so many other things, logging and monitoring and stuff, it gets me out of it. I'm no longer managing the app. I'm now managing infrastructure. And we've got so many good choices in cloud hosting that if I can ever do cloud hosting at all, I will always use that. For instance, if for logging, Papertrail. Everyone I know that uses Papertrail loves it. It is a super great, super easy to use, sort of 20 minutes configuration and you're done kind of logging solution for apps and infrastructure. So I always recommend that when people ask me, for centralized logging. Yes, there is ELK that you can run yourself. There's the Elasticsearch solution. And yes, that thing is really great. But it's way more work to do that than it is to just pay Papertrail $7 a month. So, or whatever it is. So there is a hosted ELK solution that is called LogZ. So I would tend to prefer the hosted version over the open source solution just because, like with all things, ELK takes up a lot of resources, and so I'm going to have to pay for the servers that it's running on anyway in the cloud. And it has a lot of stuff. And if you want it to be redundant, and a redundant logging solution is important, and then you want it to not be a part of your production because you don't want production to stop logging if production has a problem. So then you have to create separate infrastructure for that, and it gets a little complicated. So I tend to like cloud hosted stuff, but it's just a preference. Nothing that prevents you from doing that. All right, last few questions. So Francisco says, I just saw how Jenkins X was deployed to K8s as well, but that's deployment. Cool, thanks. Oh, okay, you're just making a comment. So that's it for the questions. I will give you the last 60 seconds to ask more questions. Looks like Rob just threw one in. But before I answer these last two questions, I just want to say thanks for showing up. We do this every Thursday, and I do it for at least an hour. Today it's been an hour and 15 minutes. I will do my best to not have audio issues next time and have some more things to talk about. But tell me in the chat what you think you want the topics to be centered around next week. This week I tried to center them around Node and PHP. Didn't sound like we have a whole lot of Node and PHP people on the call, but that's fine. We'll just do whatever you're here for. But yeah, so the last question of the day is, Rob, I wanted to suggest you review the HobbyCube project because it was a very nice intro for me to set up and running a cloud agnostic system. Oh, so HobbyCube is for learning how to use Cube? I have not used that. I just use the documentation and like the Kubernetes the hard way. stuff like that to figure out the internals. But that's a good, thanks for that suggestion. I appreciate that. So I will definitely check that out. So thanks for coming, everyone. And remember to check out my resources at brettfisher.com/docker. And you look for new courses that we're launching this fall. We've been working on them all summer, and it's exciting to hopefully get those done, as well as more updates to the Docker Mastery course and the Swarm Mastery course. They're both going to be getting new videos. And I will see you next week on YouTube Live.